Tooth to tail for teams. What exactly does that mean? This term is actually coming out of military culture, and it's a discussion about how many people are supporting the active combat personnel versus, doing something in the background. And why might you want something like that? So it's a bit of a metaphor from how long is the distance from the tail all the way to the teeth that are doing the action work. So if we think about this in terms of the supporting side of things, right? You would have one person active and a whole bunch of people in the background. And these are people doing a lot of work that you don't see. You can't have 100% of your army out there on the battlefield. You need people out there doing the logistics work, doing the planning, thinking through problems, making sure that there's good communication lines happening. And if you look at it over the last, let's call it almost a century, less than 50% has been, let's say even less than 30%, and that was World War I, where it was even close, has been, on the side of actually being on the tooth end, right? And the combat portion of this. The vast majority of roles have actually been non-combat roles. And this trend has fluctuated over the years. It's gone quite high. It's bounced back. It's a bit of a pendulum, but we've never really seen something that's, a one-to-one. I think that would be the case of, maybe medieval armies, but even they had some support personnel. So what does this mean for us, right? And think about this. When you start a company, year one, everything's kind of fine, right? Everything's fine in year one because all the work done is inside of one team. You don't have a lot of dependencies. The complexity of the business can be contained. And EPD, by the way, just means engineering product design. A lot of people think the team is really just a cluster of developers, but let's for now assume that EPD, engineering product and design, work together on a team and they deliver something valuable. So, that's year one. Everything's fine. Year two, things start to get a little bit more complicated. Somebody says, well, let's break up these teams and put a complicated topic. Let's call it integrations. You might have run into something different in your company. Let's do that. And we ended up with a dependency between them. Not all the time, but sometimes. And then as we progress further, we see that the EPD core team now has dependencies on integration and messaging and a catalog team. And we end up getting more and more teams with lots of dependencies on it. And this is a typical pattern of growth, right? So it's that core team. Everybody kind of needs access to them and they go and do their own thing. There might be hidden dependencies here that just aren't realized as well. And then we start to get the fire, right? It still works, like things are okay. You have year four, companies growing quite successful. We now have maybe 8 teams inside of the company. You have the checkout, the operations team to run things in production, and 2 integration teams. A team focused on green tech because it's important to the investors. A team focused on the catalog and the CRM and the finances. And there's dependencies between all of them, right? It's manageable at this size. It's not nice. You're definitely missing the days of yesteryear when it felt like, we got things done without all these inter-team dependencies. We didn't have to coordinate so much. And, your CXO is even starting to notice this, X just being an arbitrary placeholder for one of your executive officers. And, they start to notice something's wrong, right? They're like, EPD is pretty slow. We put in these feature requests. We're not getting things. It's not my problem yet, but we're starting to notice. And then, by year 5, you double the organization again. You have a team for everything. You have a Tiger team to fix it, a special data team, a search team, a homepage team, some executive's pet project, an AI team, because we need that now, a catalog team, a team to deal with comments. And, there was no reason to let it get this bad and let it last this long. Like, this was not necessary. And at this stage, you end up having, pretty much your whole executive teams. They're starting to get a little bit annoyed, right? Your CEO, CIO, CFO, COO, CMO, they all see something's quite wrong. It's like every time they need something delivered by, the EPD organization, they end up saying, We're tired of hearing they can't solve any core problem in less than 1 year, right? It's like we want to fix, this cross-cutting issue with our customer base, something that would unlock new markets, expand our revenues, deal with the common recurring complaints. And it ends up for any one of those changes, we have to go talk to one, two, three, four, a bunch of teams. And then a whole bunch of other teams would be left behind. And the coordination overhead is so high that the only way to deliver this, because no single team can now deliver the product in the scope of the request for change, right? There's something we need to change, or maybe you don't have a top-down request. It's just the teams individually see, maybe the CRM team here knows, to improve the business, we need to do this, but it would mean I have to coordinate with one, two, three, four, five, six teams to get the job done. Things just stop moving, right? And so if it can't be done in the scope of one team, it becomes less likely to move through the organization. So this brings us to a question here. Is like, what exactly was the strategy here? And why do we have teams that look like this? So let's zoom out, right? It's just think about this, right? We had one team. We said we had a core team, broke off into integrations. And we broke off and we broke off. And it's a little bit of a divide and conquer strategy with each new team taking on a piece of the complexity. So what was the strategy here? And there's an element of how do we break up the teams and a default mindset of let's divide and conquer. Now, divide and conquer can mean quite a lot of things, right? So if you take a look through this list, and I'll read that through with you, it's a combination of things that are fracture planes, which are logical ways to group the complexity and partition it. It's also a different thing here, which is, a force of different politics, let's say, that influence what happens, right? So a stakeholder said so. I think this one's the most common way to create a team, especially when it's not planned by anyone, right? So you have a high value stakeholder who says, I have a really important problem or a really big initiative, something's really important. I need you to go get 5, 6 people and create a team around that problem. Let's go create that. Just take a bunch of heads, throw it around that problem. Sometimes this works. Sometimes this is an absolute disaster, right? Same thing here, customer by profile. So we have a team based on the profile of your customer, right? So if you have different types of customers, because not all businesses have just one type of customer, or you're some sort of multi-customer profile space, you might have a team dedicated to the administrator, to the in-house administrator, the external customer administrator, the person using your software daily, the person doing the billing and invoicing with your software. Customer profile, right? Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. Same thing by market, right? Do you have the whole market in hand, or is it, this half of the market belongs to this team, this half belongs to another? And there's, again, many ways to divide that even inside of this topic. You can also do it by process steps. So if your process for your software is quite complex and it goes through like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stage process where at the end we're done, like building a house, you talk to your customer, say, what do you want to build? Let me acquire the resources for that. Let me get the right team in place to build your house. Let's build the house. Let's get the paperwork done. Let's sell it back to you. Close that. We can go through a concrete process, and each step gets a team. You could also have, conceptual domains. So maybe someone in your company sat down and thought about ways to group the types of ideas together, which could be completely different to all of these. Just, what groupings of concepts and ideas exist in our company. By technology, this one's very common, right? We have a front end team and a back end team. That's the default one, but there's other ways to do that too, right? So it's this team takes care of the monolith. This team takes care of their small cluster of microservices that are written in Ruby or something like this. You can also have, splitting by politics, right? So this one's unfortunate, but it does happen, right? So it's somebody in the organization is good at the dark side of politics and will end up doing things like using their power to grow their organization. So, my team needs to take this because it will help me grow something. It does happen. And it's not the best. It can also happen the other way, where everybody does have really good intentions, but it's more about how do we, maybe I shouldn't be calling that politics, but we could call that something like management load, right? So let's say management load, for instance. So how much cognitive load does your manager have taking care of these topics? Do they have enough, mind space to take on this topic right now? And I've seen, another version of that you can even see at the developer level, which is when a developer changes teams, there's a very common anti-pattern. Like the developer wrote an interesting piece of technology in their original team, gets reassigned to a new team, and everybody assumes that piece of technology will move over there with them instead of remaining in the original team. It's kind of another anti-pattern there, but it's another way that these things happen, and by individual experience with the software, right? So that's exactly that, right? So it could be the case I said, but it could also be the people in this team know Azure, and these people know AWS. So AWS code goes over there, and this one goes over there. This one's kind of common with mergers and acquisitions, right? So any one of these can generate this problem. And the problem we're talking about is when you generate dependencies. So there's something in here, the way these teams are fractured, such that when it's obvious to this group of people here that we need to drive something valuable through the organization, it ends up trying to find a home team that it can't really find. Eventually, a sponsor is found, and they try to deliver it, and they just generate dependencies. So it's like we need all these teams to coordinate to get this job done. So this is the problem: is we've divided and conquered along the wrong concept, and also what we'll explore today is along the wrong dimension. All of these are assuming, or many of these teams are assuming, the way it works here is your tooth to tail ratio. Everybody in your company, every single team is a combat team. They're all going out and doing something user facing. They're driving the domain. They're supposed to move fast. But generally, really complex teams that need to move fast, something is supporting them. Something is enabling them to move faster. So that's the whole thing here: is how do we fracture these things, right? So sometimes it's a great choice, sometimes it's a bad choice, and we need to think about how to solve that, right? So dependencies happen when we think about the boxes without the interactions between them. And I want you to really think about that. There's a lot of people who think, I can only, and it's very common, by the way, you'll see an org chart that looks just like this. And the org chart will be completely void of an understanding of how those teams interact, right? It'll just be, that's my organization, right? That's how a lot of companies create their org chart. Is I put boxes, I put topics, but they don't think about this thing. And they run into this every quarter, especially when they do program increment planning and say, okay, everyone, let's map our dependencies. They run into this problem again and again, but they don't solve for it. So let's solve for this, right? The things that change together belong together. This is a two-sided thing, right? So it means if two things need to change together all the time, they probably belong together. It's not always feasible, but there are often ways to engineer this problem away. And by engineering, I don't just mean writing technology. I mean thinking about the people and the process, and yes, of course, the technology, but also the product and how all those things work that create the necessity to, or the perceived necessity to put them into different teams. Can we avoid putting those things into different teams? So teams often have lots of challenges at once. Just a little caveat for you, like, yes, this is not the only team a challenge will have. Today, let's assume, please just assume with me for a moment, that we're going to talk about teams that are already fully cross-functional, right? There's no handovers and waterfall delivery from QA to ops, from a product manager or something like this. It's just one team, you learn, build, deploy, you build it, you own it together, right? So let's say we step back and say, okay, let's look at the things that tend to change together. We have the checkout and the homepage. Let's say those are changing together because we have some special coupons, and the catalog and search change together quite frequently. And the comments and the homepage and the catalog, that also changes together for some reason. Tiger Project is touching everyone. This is Tiger Team. If you don't know, it's maybe a bit of an anti-pattern, but it's the concept of let's pull together our best and brightest to solve our legacy code. Sometimes it works. Frequently, it's quite slow. Data team, everyone's touching AI, everyone's touching these topics. Problem with this organizational design, of course, nobody owns any of this stuff and it falls into the gap. So just assume that we've created two teams. Then let's assume all this stuff. I won't focus on this team too much, but let's assume they deal with the backing business stuff. And then we have a go shopping team, right? So they look at your customer experience and figure out, let's say this is an e-commerce company of some sort. Let's look at all the things that tend to change together so we can reduce inter-team dependencies. This results, of course, into this problem, right? This is way too complicated, right? We've tried to go from an organizational design where we had all those topics managed by 16 teams, and we've stuffed them all into 2 teams where a bunch of stuff falls between the gaps. And all of these things here, these tend to change together, but the cognitive load of assigning that to one team is so high, and there's too many people on this team to move it and work together. So this is a real problem. So we need to think about how to solve this, right? Let's take a little bit of a detour. I want you to think about this, right? This is a Vulcan starship from Star Wars. And stick with me, this will make a lot of sense in a moment. And here we have a pile of toy bricks. So this pile of toy bricks, the assignment for the team is go build a starship, maybe just a model starship, not the real one, out of a pile of toy bricks. Now, if we did this divide and conquer approach, we would say, let's divide the complexity space. Let's take my Lego bricks. So we're going to take all those bricks here, and I'm going to give one half of that to one team and one half of that to another team. And that's not too different from what we did when we created this dependency line over here, right? We said this core team and this team will send some of that complexity over to the other team. Now, it doesn't work, right? You cannot build a model, if you're very lucky if you can somehow, by dividing the pieces into 2 teams, right? So maybe you get a piece here and a piece here and a piece here. There's no guarantee you can actually build any cohesive part of this model. It's going to be a problem. Now, maybe you look at it the other way and say, okay, well, let's not look at the complexity space. Let's look at the outcome space, right? So team 1 and 2 here in my input and output space. You're going to build this half of the ship, and team 2, you're going to build that half of the ship, and then at the end, you'll join them together. This also doesn't work. If anybody here has used Lego in their life, the bricks are going to be interwoven in between. You can't just stick them together, right? It won't work that way. You probably don't even have enough structural integrity to complete the model. This is a problem, right? This doesn't work. So the question is, how do you correctly, and that's, by the way, in both these cases, to get the work done, you're going to say, okay, well, this team holds on to all my bricks. And by the way, this team holds on to all my bricks. You forced a team dependency. And in this case here, even if you try to hand over your piece, you're going to force the other team to rework everything and, reverse engineer what you've built and then rebuild it in their model and rebuild their model. Maybe they might even wait to start until you've finished so they can make sure they don't make any big mistakes or they don't have so much waste on their end. Or you force them to, act as one giant team that's doing the whole thing together. With too many people, they can't collaborate so well. This is the problem, right? We need to reduce the workload of solving this problem. We don't just break up slices of end-to-end value and hand it out. So this is an example of where, we looked at that, where the fracture planes and the ways to split up the problem space and the solution space was broken up incorrectly, right? We broke it up in ways that were not cohesive for change, right? The things that change together belong together. We broke it up in a way that the things that change together are scattered to the winds, right? And this is the common problem. This is the problem we see all the time when we create this, right? And this is a very common state to end up in. Again, there's a lot of ways out of this. And there's, by the way, multiple problems in these two teams, like multiple problems. They're too big, too many topics, probably too many people in them. A bunch of stuff falls in the gap. And there's probably a bunch of things you can't even see on this diagram. But let's think about this, right? So I want to introduce to you a platform. And so a platform is a team that helps other teams move faster. They are self-service and they are opt-in. And that might confuse people, right? So it's, if you go to a product offered by a platform team, they don't come and do the work for you. You do the work using the simplified stuff they've exposed. You might need to work with them short term to make it possible, but it should never be a long-term ongoing thing. If this happens, it's not a real platform. And it's opt-in, which means the team that uses a platform should be free at any time to walk away and do something else. And I guess I don't like that I have to keep saying this, but I have to, because the understanding of this word platform in our industry is just very confused. A lot of people think platform team means DevOps team means I have a bunch of engineers who go into my cloud services and they configure AWS for me, or they run the software in production for me, right? They act like what we call an operations team. They monitor my software in production. They configure the load balancer. That is not an ops team, right? Very simple, very abstract, doesn't necessarily have to do with cloud technology. It's just this concept of, we kind of extract some of that complexity for you and allow you tools to move faster. So let's just take a look at this, right? So I said the idea, and by the way, if you don't know team topology shapes, this one means the teams are collaborating. This one means the team is consuming an API service or something that is a self-service interaction, right? Stream A can go and use Stream B with almost no interaction. Maybe they have a 1-hour introduction call, but there's no need for Stream B to go and make major code changes, build new features for them. Maybe in the scope of, this collaboration mode. The idea is collaboration is short term and goes away, right? So this should say later. So later on, your collaboration becomes long-term interaction, and your long-term interaction is stable. You don't need to come and make code changes together. You don't have to draw those red lines to them saying, I can't deliver my project until something else is done, because they're holding on to this piece of my ship and only they can touch it. That's not the point of this team. So figure out how to build a long-term boundary with self-service features. And there's no dependency from A to B when trying to figure out work, right? Think of this platform as almost like a jetpack, right? Like you do not need a jetpack to go where you're going, but it could probably get you there a lot faster if you had one. And that's the whole point, right? So Stream A opts in to use that stable API later. Complexity is successfully pushed into the platform, right? So the thing that made a piece of work for Stream A really challenging, they still are responsible for getting that work done, but that complexity is actually handled here in the platform. They now just work on some simplified abstraction, and we'll go through some concrete examples of that because I know this is very high level and abstract right now. Stream A has the option to opt out later. I think this is one of the common mistakes that a lot of teams make. Those red lines we have there are a little bit of a helplessness saying, well, I can't change anything. I can't move forward on my mission because that team happens to own something I find useful. So I won't do anything until they get that piece done to the specifications I want, instead of just going out and getting that work done on their own. And Stream A did not give away part of their mission. I think this is also quite important, right? So if Stream A's mission was to build that Lego sculpture, they're not giving away, okay, you go build this part, I'll build this part, and we will be forced into collaboration every quarter, every month, every week, whatever that is. It's a self-service, hands-off interaction. So let's think about this, right? You have a user-facing stream-aligned team like this, and you have a platform stream that's kind of interacting with your internal teams and trying to figure out what they need and evolving their capabilities to make better jetpacks for everyone. So, and by the way, this here is called X as a service. Like it's something they emit as a service, and it's taking away cognitive load. It's not always taking away cognitive load, but let's for this explanation, let's say it's taking away cognitive load, and it does not take away the user need from being serviced by the team, right? So the core mission is to provide leverage. And if you saw my earlier video on leverage, this is part of that series. We're talking about how to build leverage here. Let's take a look here. How could we make it easier to build that spaceship? We could offer some software like this and say, let's give you tools to help you design that spaceship in an environment that is probably faster to design that system in. Let's give you tools to help you, print this, right? If you are missing a block, you might have to order one from the block store, and this could take some days, right? We don't know how fast that's going to be. So if I give you this tool, you're going to be able to print that out much faster. It means the complexity of this software, this is very complicated software, right? It's 3D rendering software with a library of parts designed out of Snap Together. It's quite a lot of complexity, but it's a different kind of complexity, right? It's not saying I'm going to build a piece of your spaceship. It's saying I'm going to help you figure out how to build your spaceship by giving you tools that let you do that work faster. Same thing here, right? It's not focused on building the spaceship. It's focused on sometimes your team gets blocked because you're missing a piece and you have to deliver it from third-party vendor. You can build it on in-house in maybe 15 minutes, right, and get unblocked quite quickly. And we have a brick sorting machine, right? So it's by the way, if you haven't seen this, I found it completely fascinating. Somebody is building a Lego brick sorting machine out of Lego and cardboard boxes and AI cameras. And it's just taking that pile of messy stuff and it's sorting them, right? This is something a platform team could do, right? They help you with the planning. They help you with the, getting the actual resources you need. It helps you, sort the complexity from this complicated mess into a simpler space so you don't have to waste time looking around. All of these things, if they were available to a team that had to build stuff like this, could help them go much faster. It's not a guarantee. It might not be the key constraint that's limiting that team. Again, look at my video about leverage to find out the whole space on that. But this is an example of the stuff a platform team could provide to this team, right? This divide and conquer only gets you so far and only works in certain cases. In other cases, we need to figure out how do we help that team do the same job faster, reduce their complexity, help them flow faster, make it more humane. This is the objective. And if you have more teams like this, you don't need to have teams that you artificially break for the wrong reasons, which you didn't break them successfully because the things that change together belong together, and you always draw a dependency line between them. You get out of that problem very quickly, right? So let's come back to this team and just think about that for a moment. So how do we help, right? Let's say we're now saying, okay, we're going to think about adding a platform team. For now, let's just ignore this scope and ignore this scope. These are quite complicated things. We're not going to fix everything overnight in one shot. But let's think about this, right? So like we said, this is way too much complexity for them to handle. So this platform down here needs to look for opportunities to reduce the complexity of getting that work done. And let's focus on this work here, right? Like, let's just limit the scope again, just in the conversation we're going to have today. So where's the complexity, right? So just think about your software development lifecycle, including the product management, discovery, everything. I've shortened a lot of the product topics into ideate, but you can also think through this. Plan is also part of that. So you come up with an idea for what you're going to build. You figure out how to build it. You build it. You test it. You deploy it. You monitor it. You service it, maintain it. There's some other boxes that are missing on both ends of this, and possibly even into the imaginary axes. There's probably other things going on as well, right? There's a lot of activities that a team takes care of, and some of it is the work done is slow or complicated. Sometimes the things inside of there are complicated. So let's just think about what could we do to reduce that complexity. And I think this is the point here is there's a lot of complexity here in servicing comments, right? Let's say there's a comment box on our website that are on catalog pages and the home pages. How do we reduce that complexity? Well, if you look all around and you just type into your search engine something like commenting SaaS, you will find something like 10 to 50 different SaaSes that seem to be relatively stable, some more than others. And they provide to you comment functionality as a service, right? Just a few lines of JavaScript, maybe a backend API key, and you can just get the comment feature. This is, of course, much easier than building, maintaining, and owning all of that stuff on your own, right? If you have a database, you have to manage the security, you have to manage the user profiles, you have to manage everything on your own and evolve that software and carry that burden with you, every month. So the question is, how do we actually reduce the complexity of that? And so, yes, using a third-party comment SaaS makes a ton of sense. There could be reasons why you can't do that, and it could be that the type of thing you're doing is so specialized there's just really no SaaS for it, or it could be that you're in a special environment where you can't do that for regulatory reasons. So the question here becomes, how do we take the generic parts of that and put it down here, and take the things that are specific to our stream and enhance that topic, right? So reduce that load to the bare minimum necessary to service your go shopping things. And then down here, comments, well, that's now an abstract capability. And it could be reused at any time by someone else. So for instance, remember I said ignore this team on the right. Let's say that the CRM wants a comment feature. At some point they say, I want to leave comments on my work items so I can have a conversation thread. Actually makes a lot of sense, right? Then they get to reduce, maybe CRM's only reduced that much, but they get to reduce that at some point. So this is the play you need to look for, is how do we remove those things? And not all of those, a lot of people look for, and I think this is one of those things that I said goes up into the imaginary dimension of the software delivery lifecycle. How do we look at software design problems? And I think that would go somewhere into the plan and the build stage, possibly the test stage is impacted, probably deployment, probably monitor. Something like this would reduce the majority of that complexity for them. Fantastic piece of functionality. It requires a platform team that understands, how do I build something that either can be injected with the details of this, the user stream that I'm servicing, or can it be designed in a way that can be enhanced without it? So it's not even just injecting it with the details so it can use it, but actually offering the base plate that can be built on top of it. And it might sound like the same thing. They have the same end result, right? You have less complexity and only the business-facing details in the team that, this one up here, this should change fast, be relatively unstable, which means, if you depend on this team, you should expect to be forced to change something quite frequently. This one here should be really stable, right? Stable in terms of change. Of course, stability here also makes a lot of sense in terms of, is there uptime? Is it, a robust API? Does it fall over frequently? Does it work? That is valuable. And I think there's a whole debate to unpack in there about how much makes sense and where and when and why. And how do you mitigate those problems as well? But that's a much deeper conversation. The key thing to think about here is, of course, what are your opportunities in when you do the ideation? What is your opportunities to reduce the cognitive load when you're planning something, when you're building something, when you're testing it, when you're deploying it, when you're monitoring it, when you're doing the other boxes that I haven't added onto this diagram, right? And there's probably even boxes in the middle that belong here somewhere. There's probably, and again, like I said, what are your architecture standards? Can this platform, instead of taking off a piece of functionality, can they provide you let's say you're using a framework that's quite annoying to use. Can they provide to you something that you only have to specify a YAML file? And now you have, let's say a lot of your complexity around catalog in the feature you were building, let's say a lot of complexity there was built around configuring a lot of complicated details. Can this team and the platform here, can they expose something that is a frameworking of that catalog problem? So you just plug in some YAML files and away you go. If you want to use that with a reduced configuration complexity, they could do something like that for you. I also think there's the traditional approach that a lot of people have been running into, and I think is one of the reasons we have all the confusion on what a platform is. You could also have a team down here where they take care of, let's say they give you some Terraform packages, and these will do things like, they're the default Terraform configurations to host, deploy, monitor even your product. This Streamline team is still totally cross-functional and owns everything they build. So they still use it. It just means instead of them having to absorb all the complexity of a Terraform package, which might be an enhanced complexity if you're in a regulated environment with security rules and all kinds of things on top, they can take away that complexity. You're still responsible for doing all those things. It's just you don't have to worry about it so much anymore. You can focus on the things that change together, belonging together in terms of the things really germane to that complexity. Escaping accidental complexity, escaping enlarged complexity, making things more complex than they need to be. Like if you just need to worry about people using comments, maybe somebody can provide the comments. If you worry about search, maybe someone can provide that search function for you, right? Can that work? So how do you design that platform? That's the whole thing here is think about the tooth to tail ratio, right? The default thinking that got the company where they are is their tooth to tail ratio was, if you look in the details, I think there's 1-to-1, like they had an ops team in there. You can make an argument that that's kind of the tail side of this thing. But most of these teams are, I own the vertical stack of complexity. We're not trying to extract complexity. We're not trying to help our teams, right? We don't have this team structure where we have, a bunch of people doing things to make sure this team can go out and complete their mission as quickly as possible, as effectively as possible, understand this, just hyper complicated realm of, interconnected complexities that nobody really understands very well and cannot be understood in a fractured sense, right? Think about this, right? So in this organization, one of the reasons nothing's happening is everybody has a fractured understanding of their business. So if you had somebody who could understand the need for change together, you could also accelerate that, right? So you get a synergistic boost out of this. So this is something to think about is when you're splitting up your teams, make sure you actually have some teams helping you go faster. There's a lot of ways to do that, even when you're playing with Lego bricks, even when you're playing with CI, search, comments, whatever it is. And there's going to be opportunities for this stuff, even in your domains. You have to look for it. It's not easy, but you need to do this to get out of the dependency trap, right? You can't just split up the Legos and assume that something will work. You've forced the collaboration to happen. And it's not that any of these are wrong, right? There are perfectly normal, sensible reasons to create multiple teams that are not platforms, right? You can't have one team for everything. That's also too much complexity. But think about how to make this work correctly. I think that's it for today. So think about that. Think about your tooth to tail for teams, right? Are your teams all tooth, no tail? Or how are you helping your teams actually accelerate their performance? That's it for today. If you enjoyed this, please remember to subscribe. I'm posting a lot more videos on this. If you've been watching for a while, you should remember this is part of the series I did on leverage and what does it mean to build leverage and how do I build it and how do I do that through people, process, and technology spaces. This is just looking at one case only from a product and technology space. Much more for us to explore. And if you stay tuned, you can find out even more interesting tactics to just help things move faster and keep this group of people from being disappointed in you. All right. Thanks so much. And I'll see you next time.